Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining the Field Huddle this morning. We're going to be talking about the insect forecast for 2022 and Cargill's approach to sustainability. And joining me on the call today is Janina Kura, the Regional Agronomy Leader. So welcome, everyone. So the topics we're going to cover today are the economic thresholds of insects, wheat midge, Bertha armyworms, and grasshoppers in particular. Those are the three insects so far that we do have forecast maps for. So to start off, I will talk to you guys about the insect thresholds. So an economic threshold can help growers do a cost-benefit analysis of a pesticide application. Insecticide applications can be costly, they can take time, and they can also reduce the populations of beneficial insects. So they're essentially a tool that do help us diagnose when an insecticide application should be done. And the threshold can actually vary by crop, insect, the time of year, grain markets, yield, and the environment. So an example that we have here is with Bertha armyworms. So if you have $20 a bushel canola, and your rate of coragen you're going to go at is the 50 mils per acre, and let's say it costs a price of $12 an acre and $10 an acre to aerial spray it, it'll cost a total of $22 an acre to spray it. So the economic threshold of this example would be 1 to 2 Bertha armyworms per foot squared to pay for the entire application. So with that being said, it's always good to consider if the price of grain is going up, what does that mean in terms of the economic threshold on your crops? So the first insect I will be talking about today is wheat midge. So your host of wheat midge is wheat, of course. High-risk fields include continuous recropping of wheat, and the life cycle starts from pupae in the late June or early July. The eggs are laid in the evening, and essentially when the winds are less than that 10 kilometers per hour and 15 degrees Celsius. Eggs hatch in a week, the larvae feed on the plants, and then the larvae drop the heads after 2 weeks, and they can actually overwinter in the soil. So a good question to always be aware of or ask yourself is, what variety of wheat am I growing? Because there are tolerant varieties for wheat midge. So some wheat midge treatment options would include your crop rotation, and like I said, the tolerant varieties are very important. So you can refer to the SAC seed guide for more information, or also reach out to your sales rep or your market development agronomist. Another treatment option would be early seeding, higher seeding rates, and insecticides such as Saigon or Lagon. The impacts of wheat midge. So wheat midge does reduce yield because the kernel development is affected. So when wheat midge affects those kernels, they tend to shrivel up and be very small. So they do blow out the back of the combine. So there's really no way of saving those kernels. And then reduced grades also are an outcome, as the kernels are shriveled and crack if they do come into contact with wheat midge, and you can have yield losses of 15% at threshold. So there is 2 thresholds for wheat midge. The first one would be 1 adult per 4 to 5 wheat heads for a yield loss, and 1 adult per 8 to 10 heads for grade. Wheat midge control. So you should always start the wheat midge conversation and scouting for wheat midge once the forecast maps are released, but especially during flag leaf timing. Always scout for wheat midge in the evenings, as that's when they are out. And if thresholds are met at heading, you should spray an insecticide. An example, so if you're seeding wheat early, you might miss the window in mid-May. But if the wheat midge is generally emerging when the wheat does start to head. So those are two important factors to consider when you're looking for wheat midge. An interesting fact about wheat midge is that the females actually lay their eggs um, kind of dependent around the environmental conditions. So when it's above the 15 degrees and when the winds are below 10 kilometers, so the environmental conditions do have an effect on how these insects have adapted, and it's actually pretty unique. And this is our wheat midge forecast map for 2022. So as you can see, the wheat midge is generally below that 600 range for most of Saskatchewan. Um, but it is always important to keep an eye on your crops and always be scouting. So your wheat midge application timing, when you are timing to use an insecticide for wheat midge, you have to be sure that the heads are coming out and they're not, or they could not be fully exposed. Sometimes people say that you can spray at fusarium head blight timing, but like I said, sometimes the timing just doesn't work. It can be too late for wheat midge and too early for fusarium head blight timing. Does anyone have any questions on wheat midge or any comments you'd like to add? If not, I'll move on to Bertha armyworms. So Bertha armyworms are a host in canola. High-risk fields include fields that are being reseeded into cruciferous crops. The life cycles, they emerge as overwintered pupae in June to early August. They're typically attracted to blooming canola fields, and there is one generation per year. So the eggs of the Berthas are laid in clusters and on the underside of the leaves. So if you flipped your canola leaves over, that's typically where you will see the Bertha armyworm eggs. But the most critical stage for this insect is the larvae stage, and that's when they're pale green in color and they have kind of a light colored stripe on their side, and they curl into a C shape when they're on the ground and you touch them. So these insects are can be easy to spot, but you got to be looking for them. So the impacts of Bertha armyworms, they do reduce yields due to the feeding on the leaves, and they can cause the premature ripening and shattering of your canola pods. So it's always good to be aware of this insect and to be scouting for them. So our Bertha armyworm forecast map looks fairly good for this year, but in that most of Saskatchewan's in that 0 to 900 or 300 range. One thing to also consider is that every 10 to 12 years there is a Bertha armyworm outbreak. Janine, I don't know if you could comment on that.
Yeah, so it is oh, there's a little bit of an echo, Chanel. Um, yeah, so they cycle, it's every 10 to 12 years that we'll typically see an increase in Bertha armyworm populations. It's not always the same area, it's not always the whole province. I think it is just worth noting. So last year wasn't a huge issue, maybe a few spots we're seeing some increased Bertha armyworm counts. But just because this is the moth counts in 2021 does not mean that we will or won't have a problem in 2022. Sometimes it can just show a trend. So I think it's just important to be on the lookout.
Very good points. Thank you. Um, so with Bertha application or Bertha armyworm application timing, you should apply your insecticide early in the morning or late in the evenings, just because that's when the larvae are actively feeding. And don't apply on hot afternoons. Use high water volumes in crop canopies and always consider your economic threshold. So here's a chart that's a good chart that goes through the economic thresholds in line with the value of your crop. So some Bertha armyworm treatment options. You can refer to your sales reps or your market development agronomists as they'll be sharing updates as the season progresses. You should begin scouting 2 weeks after peak flowering and always count your populations in a meter squared rather than um in a meter squared, and then refer to your economic threshold. Some insecticides you can use are your Coragen, Decis, and Matador. Coragen is the safest option, and I would say the best option for Berthas as the timing lines up with the beneficials when Berthas are sprayed. So it's important to always consider those beneficial insects.
I think maybe Chanel, if I can just note that there is a new concentrated form of coragen for application. Hey.
Yes, so that's the Coragen Max application, and yeah, it is more concentrated. So you can refer to your sales rep or market development agronomist for more information on the Coragen Max. Now I'll move into grasshoppers. So grasshoppers are host in cereals, forage crops, lentils, canola, and flax. The reason I have lentils highlighted there is that the threshold in lentils is very low. So it's important to always be looking for grasshoppers in your lentil crops. Some high-risk fields include fields that are adjacent to hayland, pasture, or fields that have had heavy infestation in the previous year. The life cycle of grasshoppers, they overwinter as eggs or adults. The eggs hatch in early May to July, and then the hatchling grasshoppers move into the field margins, and that's when they will begin feeding. So, impacts of grasshoppers. Grasshoppers do cause yield loss, a decreased grade. They actually strip the pods of canola due to their leaf chewing and their stem stripping. So that can cause both stress and essentially death on your plants. Estimating the grasshopper densities can be difficult, but it's always important to be looking for them in season. So start the conversation and start thinking about those grasshoppers when the forecast maps come out, which they have. Um, Treatment options could be discussed once the populations increase and once the damage is observed in fields, and you should control them early and before they can fly. So grasshoppers are important to control early when they're small, as when they get older, they do become harder to control. The forecast map here shows we're fairly in the green, so that's good to see, but there are some light pressures in some areas.
And probably depending what happens this spring. So if we continue to stay dry and it is hot weather, it can we can see a significant increase as well.
Yes, good thing to note there. Um, so when you're spraying for grasshoppers, you do want to spray between that third and fourth instar. So I added a photo here so you can kind of gauge where the grasshoppers would be in their life cycle when to spray them. So the third to fourth instar is ideal. And there's actually three types of grasshoppers that we do have here in Saskatchewan. So there's the two-stripe migratory and then the clear-winged grasshoppers. Um, and the migratory grasshoppers actually can go very far. Janina, if you can comment on the research you had seen with the grasshoppers.
Yeah, so one of the entomologists on a call just in the last couple months shared some I guess kind of interesting information. So there was a significant amount of migratory grasshoppers that were thousands of feet in the air. And it was kind of a grouping or kind of almost a locust like behavior in the northern states in North Dakota and Montana, and then just kind of touching Saskatchewan and Alberta. That they were actually able to detect the population on a radar map because there were so many of them. So a little bit like nightmares are made of, but yeah, I thought it was kind of amazing that insects can do it. Amazing and terrifying, I should say.
Yes, I would agree with that one. Um, so with that being said, there are many insects that we do see in season, so it's important to consider all of them. These are just the ones right now that we do have forecast maps for. So if you guys have any questions, please feel free to reach out. But I will note to be aware of your beneficial insects. So apply your insecticides when the bees are the least active. Bee activity does occur during the day, so apply your insecticides late evening or early morning. Um, and try to use insecticides that are the least hazardous to the bees, like Coragen. You can refer to your chemical label or to your sales rep for more information on that. And some best practices for spraying. So always use high water volumes. Generally, it's not a good idea to spray if it's above that 25 degrees. Always spray when your insects are active, feeding, and visible. Know the life cycle of your insects and adjust your spray rates accordingly. Always follow your safety recommendations, including your re-entry of fields. This is very important. And when insects meet threshold, it's important to deal with it quickly because some insects can cause damage faster than you would than one would think. So it's always important to be out scouting those fields, and once those insects meet threshold, get some insecticide on there. And lastly, make sure to always consider your maximum residue limits for your pre-harvest intervals. Does anyone have any questions or comments to add?
Chanel, I know there was a few insects that you haven't mentioned on this presentation because you were focusing on the forecast maps, but was there anything else to add, I guess, for you or Tracy, just around other insects and kind of what we can anticipate for 2022?
I would say always keep note of your cutworms, your aphids, flea beetles. Those are all important insects that can cause damage to your crops and that you should be scouting for regularly in season. Tracy, I don't know if there's any insects I missed that you would add, but those would be my top top insects of concern.
No, I think you covered them. The only other one is wireworm, just because you like kind of have to prepare for next season if you do see them.
Good call out. Good call out. And we do have some seed treatments that do have control on wireworms too. So I like that you bring that one up. With that being said, I will move on to Cargill's approach to sustainability. Janina, if you could just let me know when you want the slides changed here.
All right. So yeah, like Chanel had mentioned, I'm Janina Kerr. I'm the regional agronomy leader for Cargill in Saskatchewan. I do want to talk a little bit today about our Regen Connect program that we're doing across Western Canada and with 9 farms in Saskatchewan. You can go to the next slide, Chanel. All right. So Cargill is exploring exploring this space. It was actually piloted kind of a year earlier in the U.S., and I'll talk a little bit more about what they're doing this year with Regen Connect. But I guess you may ask why now? Why is Cargill wanting to participate in this space? And so I think the 3 points here kind of really highlight the reasons. So. Um, Climate change obviously is a big concern and a really hot topic, I guess you could say, in agriculture. And so wanting to recognize that. Consumers are also very concerned about the impacts to the environment, the food that they eat, and what that means. And then Cargill, as well as many of our customers as well, have made commitments around reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And so we feel that it's important to be a leader in this space, and this is one of the things that we're doing. Chanel, you can go to the next slide. Okay, so this is an interesting slide that I thought it was worth sharing. So there isn't a really good, very liquid carbon market today. So there's a lot of different things happening in this space, but there's not a global market right now for carbon credits. In saying that, there is anticipation or expectation that the market is going to increase substantially by 2030. And the size of this market is expected to be somewhere between $5 and $180 billion by that 2030 mark. And so this is really going to depend on a number of factors. But if you even just look at the next bullet point here, so 1/5 of the world's largest 2,000 companies have net zero targets. And so Cargill would have established and have established some of our own greenhouse gas emission reductions. And so, we do feel like we're in a unique space. So we're working closely with farmers and also end use customers, and wanna partner and come with some solutions and stay ahead. All right, next slide. Okay, so there is 5, I guess, main segments of this market. I'm not going to touch on all of these, but I think it is just important to note that not only do we not only need sellers, so farmers wanting to participate in this market, and the buyers who want to purchase it, but we need protocols, so potentially third party verification or audits that would need to ensure that everything's being followed. There needs to be a price established. So today, we may assume, or some people assume, that there is an established price for carbon. That isn't really the case. So there is a carbon tax. And so the federal government in some way, I guess, has kind of established a price, but it isn't a free market by any means. And the market prices today kind of vary, or more just end use customers that are looking to pay for carbon. Also, there's this whole governance piece, right? And so how is that going to be regulated? What that looks like today? I guess another key point around this is we hear a lot about carbon, and this slide itself talks about carbon, but when we talk about greenhouse gas emissions, methane and nitrous oxide are also really big factors. And in most cases, it does vary a little bit, but 200 to 300 times nitrous oxide is more of a concern than carbon today. So I guess that is a huge risk for greenhouse gas emissions, that nitrous oxide, so the fertilizer that we're applying, if it's released into the atmosphere, is 200 to 300 times potentially more going to affect our climate than carbon would. So yeah, I guess Tracy or any questions, I guess, on this slide? Okay, next one, Chanel. I did mention that I was going to share what the US Regen Connect program is doing. And so I thought it was really interesting to share this slide. I've actually had a number of questions on it as well. So they obviously different farming practices in the states that are highlighted there. Like I said, they're about a year ahead of us. So they would have piloted with about a dozen or so growers in 2021. And I've really expanded it for the 2022 growing season. Crops are very different than what we grow in Canada for the most part. Also, they focused around no-till and minimum tillage, as well as cover crops, which, again, not as applicable here in Western Canada. Our focus generally has been around the use of nitrogen stabilizers. So as I mentioned, nitrous oxide is a huge concern for climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. So that's been our big focus. Obviously, there's other practices around soil health that we care about too. So what we may do in Western Canada and will continue to do is going to be a little bit different. I guess the kind of the middle point, I do really want to highlight the 1-year contract. And so there are a number of companies that are coming out with different programs, maybe specific to carbon. Others maybe look a little bit different. But what I would really recommend, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we're doing here in Canada for pricing. We're not participating in the carbon market today, but I wouldn't suggest signing more than a 1-year contract. I'm hearing of some companies out there doing 5-year contracts and not a very high price point. And so we really don't know where this market's going to head. We said that market, the carbon market, could be up to $180 billion globally in about 8 years. So it wouldn't be ideal if this space really expands and the price that you're getting paid for practices that you're already doing or maybe plan on doing, if you're locked into a couple dollars an acre and maybe in 3 or 4 years it's more like $30 or $40 an acre or more. So again, that's just kind of one thing I really want to highlight, and some of the best advice that I've heard and really resonated with farmers is don't sign anything more than a 1-year contract today. So yeah, like I said, they're paying for net carbon sequestered today in Canada. We aren't doing that yet. And then Cargill has also partnered in the US with several companies. Regrow is kind of the one I do want to highlight. And so they're running the data analysis and coming back to us with the information that we're collecting. And so I believe that partnership has been a really good thing for Cargill. Next slide, Chanel.
Janina, I would ask the question, if a grower does want to be on the Regen Connect program, do they need to have any like farm management system such as like the climate field view? Do they have to be on a program like that already?
Yeah, great question, Chanel. Actually, can I touch on that in a couple slides here, if you don't mind?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Don't let me forget to answer that. So our regenerative ag, or Regen Connect, as we have named it or dubbed it, is really about best management practices for farmers. It's around soil health, following 4 Rs, really, I guess, looking at it dual purpose. So not only the right agronomic practices, which is really important, but that what we're doing is also good for the environment and for our soil. And so the goal is really just to make it easy to participate in different regenerative practices. Yeah, and I'll talk a little bit about data collection and verification. So I'll kind of highlight some of the key points in order to participate in the next slide. If you can go to the next one, Chanel. Okay, so we're doing anywhere from 500 to 1,000 acres with 9 farms in Saskatchewan, 23 across Western Canada. We're paying $10 per acre. In order to participate, there's a couple key things. So need to use a nitrogen stabilizer or enhanced efficiency fertilizer. And so what I mean by that is ESN, Agrotane, Anvil. Those would all fit into those categories or into that category. I would say data collection is going to be very important. So cropping history going back 5 years more if possible for those specific fields. So to your point, Chanel, they don't need climate field view, but if we can get some of that history, it is important. So whether that's recorded in a spreadsheet or on a piece of paper or in field view, those can all work today in how we're doing it. We also need to get the legal land description and draw out the field boundaries. And then I guess the last major point that I do want to highlight just is around soil sampling. So in order to participate, the farms that are on, we needed to do soil sampling on those fields, and then also follow 4R practices. And so this past year, we were paying $10 per acre. We haven't launched this next year, so it'll be 2022 into 2023 program. And so that'll be likely in May and June, that we'll have a pretty good idea what next year's program is going to look like, and start reaching out to farms. And if anyone, I guess, who's listening today is interested, please reach out to your sales rep or your market development agronomist. All right. Any other comments or questions?
I think that was a really good overview of the program, Janina. Thank you for speaking on that. And yeah, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to reach out to your sales rep or your market development agronomist for more information.